Hi everybody, welcome to Paul Programs. Today, we're going to take a look at character creators in games. So first, we'll start off by looking at what a character creator is. Then, we'll take a look at how they're used in physical games. After that, we'll dive into digital games. And lastly, we'll see how you can build your own character creator in Unity. So, what is character creation? Character creation is the act of creating a character. So, in many games, you'll see that there are different ways you can build your character. This will involve choosing their race, their stats, deciding what they look like, all sorts of other things. MMOs and other RPGs are very big for using character creators to allow players to insert themselves into the world of the games they're playing. Now that we have a grasp on what a character creator is, let's take a further dive by looking at some physical games. And by physical games, I mean Big Daddy. Big Daddy with Adam Sandler. No, that's not what I meant. I mean Dungeons and Dragons, obviously. So, Dungeons and Dragons is a role-playing game that people have been playing for quite some time. We're going to take a look at basically what goes into actually building a character in Dungeons and Dragons. Most players start off by picking their stats. Others choose by starting off with a backstory. But basically, in Dungeons and Dragons, you create a character that'll journey on this grand campaign with several other players. And that is basically a player's way of interacting with the world. That's their avatar. That's their way of being in the world and forming a bond with the other characters that are in there. Some players like to take physical games a step further by actually creating miniatures. Miniatures allow them to take their customly created character and associate them with something. So they'll even give them custom paint jobs or all sorts of goodies just to make them stand out and allow players to really have something to represent themselves within a game. Now that we've talked about physical games, let's take a look at some digital games that make use of character creators. One of my favorite games is Mass Effect. In the Mass Effect series, you're able to create a character that you take through the original trilogy of games. This character, you decide what they look like, what their role is, their job, and then on top of that, you even get to make decisions as the character that impact the world. This bond really helps drive you into the world of Mass Effect and make you feel like you're a part of everything that's going on in there. But there are more games that use character creation besides just Mass Effect. There's also Destiny that lets you build your Guardian and then go on a big sprawling space adventure with them, or Monster Hunter where you get to hunt large monsters in all sorts of terrains. Another use of character creation is actually the Me system on your Nintendo Switch, which lets you create an avatar that you can associate in several games like Mario Kart or Super Smash Bros. And these are just some of the examples of digital games where players can pour hours in just trying to make their character just right for themselves. But all that effort really does form a bond. Hopefully, that's given you a nice insight on some of the digital games that make use of character creation. Now, let's dive in and see how we can make our own character creator. Alright, so now we have Unity loaded up. The first thing we're going to take a look at is our hierarchy on the right. As you can see here, we have our player, our canvas, which handles all of our UI elements, our character creator manager, which is going to actually handle a lot of the heavy lifting of managing the character creation. So first, let's take a look at the player. Under the player, we have different components. We have the player's face, we have the player's body, we have the player's shirt, their pants, shoes, and hair broken out into two different smaller components. After looking at the player, let's take a quick look at our UI. So, as you can see, here on our UI, we have 3 different buttons. Each of these buttons handles a different function, like changing the player's body, changing the player's hair, and changing what job they have. But the thing that actually makes everything happen is the character creator manager. So let's click on it to the right here, and as you can see, let's go over to our inspector, and under here we'll have the different materials that will be actually swapped in. So you're able to set how many different materials you want to use for the body, how many you want to use for your hair, and then the shirt and pants are actually tied together under the job button. So when you actually click one of the buttons, it'll switch to the next material in line and then loop back to the beginning. Then if we actually go back to the individual buttons on our canvas, we can take a look, and under the button, you'll actually see on click, it's tied to the character creator manager, and then it'll actually call the specific method that we want to use. So now that we've taken a quick look at everything in Unity, let's jump into code and see what things look like on that side. Alright, now that we're in our code, let's start taking a look at what's going on here. Up top, we have our variables. Right here are our public ones, which we can use the inspector to then map different things like the player or each of the different materials that we'll be using for the actual components we're switching out. Below that, we have our private variables, which represent all the different parts of a player, which we'll set later in our start method. And then lastly, we have our integers, which are used to track which material we're actually going to be displaying at that point. Now, let's take a look at our start method. Here in the start method, we set all the private game objects to look for each of the different parts of the player, basically. And those game objects will then be set so we can use them later on for changing their materials out. Below that, we actually have all of our methods that handle all the heavy lifting of the code. To start off, we have our change hair method. This is going to be the one that handles all the change of materials for a player's hair. Here we have an increment upward to the next hair that we're going to be using. If that's set to more than what we actually have set as our materials, then it'll loop right back to the original one. Then we have another component which is actually going to count all the different children that are located under our hair object. Because the hair is broken up into two parts, it's going to be necessary to actually loop through each of those parts and change the material for them, which is actually what we do right down here. And in the loop, we're going to actually select which child we're looking at and then change the material to the current hair material that we should be using. Next, we're going to take a look at our body objects. So here we have change body. This does a very similar thing to change hair, except that instead of looping through all the different children, it's just going to loop through one object for the body. So we increment upward to what the current body we're going to be swapping to is. We make sure we haven't gone over the amount we actually have. And then we take the game object for the body, and then we swap out its material for the current body object we're going to be using. Last but not least, we have our change job, which basically, again, it's going to increment the job upward, but instead of checking if one material's been reached, you're going to actually check to see if you haven't gone over the amount of pants materials and shirt materials. If you have gone over either or, then it's going to reset back to the first of both lists. After that, we're then going to set both the shirt object and the pants object and change their materials to what the current job is set to. That covers all of our methods, and as you can see, it's pretty straightforward. There's nothing too complicated in here, but this handles a lot of the heavy lifting of what our game's going to do. Now that we've seen how everything works behind the scenes, let's actually run it and see what's actually going on. So, here we have our scene loaded up, and if we press each of the buttons, it's actually going to change all the different things for a player. So here we have our change body button, and if we click on that, it's going to change what the player's body actually looks like by switching out the different materials. If we decide to change the player's hair, we would just click the change hair button, and then it swaps out the materials for each of the parts of a hair. As you can see, we also have a little bit of fun blue time going here. And then the last part is, if we change the player's job, it's going to actually change that outfit. So here we have our programmer type of outfit. Here we actually have a doctor. And then last but not least, we have our garbage man. So this basically covers what actually happens when the games actually run. Now that we've seen everything in action, that pretty much covers how you would actually build a character creator in Unity. But if we wanted to take this a step further, one thing we can do is replace our buttons with sliders that actually let the player slide between the different materials that are in the list. Another thing we can do is add a larger variety of things. Right now this is just 3 for each of them, but we can add so many different materials to represent all sorts of looks, feels, and character types. And the last thing that would be interesting to do is take our player that's been created and throw them into a game scene. Maybe something similar to what I showed you guys in the debug room when I was showing you guys how to fail fast. Hopefully, everyone was able to learn a bit about character creators and how they can even build their own for their own game. So, if you have any thoughts or comments, even questions, leave those below. I'll also have a link to the GitHub below. Thanks for watching, and I'll catch you next time.